Feeling lost is universal. And being found can feel impossible. But on this podcast, we think following your passions just might be the key to finding your purpose and to finding who you are. Welcome to Lost and Found. Alrighty, and welcome to Lost and Found. So this is a new podcast that tries to delve into, the lives and experiences of people who have found fulfillment and purpose in their career paths or just their paths in life, whether it's a full-time job or maybe a side project or anything like that. But so we delve into those people's lives to try to help those who might feel lost, find a connection there, and hopefully, through that, find some satisfaction and purpose of their own. So today I am joined by one of those folks, Alison Perry Sower. Thank you so much for joining me, Alison.
You're so welcome.
It's a great honor to be speaking with you. First off, I was hoping that maybe you could kind of discuss a little bit about what it is that you're well known for, because like I mentioned before we started recording, I found your LinkedIn profile, and I was looking at everything you've done, and it's amazing. I feel like you've been in like all the sectors, and you've done so much great work. So I was hoping you could chat a little bit about what you're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been in different sectors. I've worked in the private sector, I've worked in government, and probably to answer your first question, what I'm most known for is founding the nonprofit Central Oregon Veterans Ranch, which is a 19-acre working farm located in the heart of Central Oregon that is a working ranch that restores purpose and spirit to veterans of all ages and eras. So it is about bringing veterans, specifically combat veterans or other trauma survivors from military-related trauma, into community through agriculture and peer support. So it's really a sanctuary for folks who have experienced that level of trauma and are kind of lost on their own, trying to seek their own purpose and meaning in life and sort of rebuild themselves and their lives. And so you and I had emailed a little bit about the documentary that we had made in 2022, which was really a highlight. The Veterans Ranch will be in its 10th year of operation next April.
Wow.
So awesome. It's in its 9th year currently. So in 2022, we partnered with a Los Angeles production company and had a film made called Cover Me, The Path to Purpose. And it really highlights our work and the impact that the Veterans Ranch had. And so prior to that, as you saw on my LinkedIn page, I worked in the Department of Veterans Affairs as a trauma therapist for 6 years. And I've also taught part-time at the State Police Academy in Oregon. And I worked in private practice at a couple different points in my career, at the very beginning, and then also just prior to starting the Veterans Ranch. And I started out I started out as a child wanting to be an artist. That was my passion, was art. And I got into college, and like a lot of people, I thought, I'm probably not gonna be able to make a living at this. And my husband and I had this interesting conversation in the car today. We were talking about, this being on the podcast, and he said, well, art wasn't really your passion, or you would have made it a career. And so we had this it's very interesting. And I thought, no, I really wanted to make it a career, but I didn't think I'd make a great living painting, terracotta pots and having them fired in a kiln. And I wanted to start a garden art business. But anyway, I ended up getting an undergraduate degree in art history. But, I think you listen to those little voices and you find what resonates with your soul and what you're most interested in. And so what I became most interested in was the stories of the artists' lives
Mm.
more
Yeah.
so than the thought of being an artist myself or of, working in a museum as an art historian. I found what really resonated with me was the lives of the artists and their stories. And
Yeah.
that is something that has been a part of every stage of my career
Mm.
as a
Yeah.
trauma
Yeah.
therapist, as a nonprofit founder. Storytelling has been so key. So anyway, I do want to mention that, and feel free to interrupt and ask me a question at any time, because I have so many thoughts on. I think your podcast is a great subject, and I have so many thoughts on it.
Mhm.
So, with that kind of listening to what resonates with your soul and what you find most interesting, and sort of, figuring out your path that way as you go, and where you want to go, I became very interested in art therapy
Yeah.
during that time as well, because that kind of combined my two passions of art and listening to people's stories and wanting to help people.
Mhm.
Uh, that emerged as a result of some of my own personal life experience, the wanting to help others, and that kind of combined with that being interested in people's stories, particularly artists, and
Yeah.
how they became artists and why.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then sometimes major events happen in our life, right, that change the trajectory of our lives, such as
Yeah.
going to war.
Mhm.
For me, that the beginning of that was 9/11.
Yeah.
Um, and having a brother serving in the military active duty as a helicopter pilot prompted my brother to deploy for the invasion of Iraq in 2003 as
Wow.
uh, as a helicopter as an attack helicopter pilot, which wasn't what he wanted to be doing. He wanted to
Yeah.
fly medevac missions. So that experience, had that not happened, I probably would have stayed in private practice as a therapist after getting a master's degree in counseling.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that's um, yeah. Sometimes it's that listening to your soul, discovering what resonates with you on your journey. But then sometimes these major events happen that
Yeah.
sort of redirect your course.
Yeah, and that is still, your passion, I suppose, right? It's interesting because I think people might kind of think that, as a kid, it's almost like, oh, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to be an astronaut. I want to be, whatever. So I think when people think about passions, they kind of go back to childhood and
Mhm.
they're like, oh, what did I like when I was a kid? And so sometimes that can be very surface level. But I think you mentioned you got to the root of it, which is really helping people. So it still is a through line, through everything that you've done. And I think that is very important to mention. Plus, of course, like you said, you can have experiences that completely change the course of your life as well. But you're still like, even though it did change the course of your life, it's still again within that same through line of helping people. So it's very interesting. And so I'm wondering, uh, how how did you realize that helping people and learning about people's stories was that through line? Was there a moment that you could remember?
I think it was. I think the reason why I was so curious about the lives of artists, and many artists, struggle with depression,
Hmm.
or have, poets,
Yeah.
painters, that their artists are expressing something, and oftentimes it's the need to express is so great because the emotion is so overwhelming or so painful or so difficult.
Hmm.
So I grew up in a family of trauma survivors, I'll call it that. So there
Yeah.
was a lot, it's not an accident that I ended up being a trauma therapist. So it was, divorce,
Mm.
suicide attempts, alcoholism, domestic violence. I mean, it was really, and that was for, a couple generations. There were things going on, and that was influenced by war and
Mm.
immigration, uh, different influences. But I think what I was interested in hearing people's stories, and like a lot of people who go into therapy, you're kind of trying to figure out your own past, right? You're trying to
Yeah.
figure
Yeah.
out how this works, how psychology works, how we become the way we are.
Mm.
And oftentimes it's those are the people, if they're doing their own work, who become the best healers and the best. And I think for me, it was my own personal experience of trauma, and then later on my brother's experience, who, he ended up doing 3 deployments in Iraq, and he's just about to medically retire from the Army.
Mm.
Being able to go into those places with people, and then
Mhm.
just having that curiosity, which has been the thread, as you were mentioning, that has been the thread of my career, having that curiosity about how do we become the way that we are, and then how do we heal from those experiences that were the more painful aspects of how we became who we are. But also, so you asked earlier what I'm doing now. So I'm working,
Yeah.
I have my own business, it's an LLC. So I'm doing trauma informed coaching and
Mhm.
consulting. So with other people founding nonprofits, trying to develop nonprofits or working in nonprofits. I'm also doing some education and teaching, clinical education workshops and that type of thing, and now exploring some other teaching opportunities at the university level and potential research, looking at how to facilitate post-traumatic growth in veterans using some
Mm.
of the means that I have in my career with agriculture, peer support, and sort of combining these elements.
Yeah.
Um, so I think that resonance of um, curiosity
Mhm.
about how we got to be who we are, how we develop as humans, how trauma impacts our development, and
Yeah.
then how do we heal.
Mhm. So if we could talk a little bit about what you founded, the Central Oregon Veterans Ranch.
Mhm.
So I'm wondering what made you, I guess, do that? Like, what made you say, I have to start a ranch for all of these veterans? Like,
Mhm.
why not? Why not? I don't know, something else. Like, what? Why was it that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs for 6 years. And so I got my
Yeah.
master's degree at Portland State University and briefly was in private practice. And then after my brother's deployment, I sought out working in the VA system and sort of worked my way into the system as an unlicensed counselor.
Mhm.
And I was at the Portland VA Medical Center in the city. They call it Pill Hill. It's just a little bit up from downtown Portland,
Mm.
for 3 years before transferring out to a more rural community-based outpatient clinic called a CBOC. So it's a satellite of the VA out in Central Oregon.
Mhm.
And working in all of us have been in government buildings, government offices, and they're not super inspiring, and being coming from an artistic background,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And someone who loves nature, it's kind of jarring sometimes to be in that environment.
Mhm.
And so I had a veteran at one point who I really credit with the reason the ranch exists. And he was a young 22-year-old Iraq vet, and he had come into the system he'd come home from combat, was drugged and sexually assaulted by his combat buddy, the one person he trusted most in the world, had
Okay.
come from a very dysfunctional family that signed him up for the Oregon National Guard as soon as he was 18. So he had no intention of even joining the military.
Mm.
So has that traumatic experience when he comes back. And then he's having, because of all of this trauma over the course of his life and being so young, he's having his first symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia.
Mm.
And he was aware of these things happening. He didn't know how to manage it at the time, but he was aware that they were happening. And he was really, because of the trauma, he was almost more like working with a teenager because he was
Yeah.
really developmentally kind of behind the curve. And I really just spent a lot of time getting to know him as a human and building trust, and not approaching it from that sort of medical level of, we're going to give you this treatment and, make you
Yeah.
remember these things. And so I really sort of took this veteran under my wing, and I was collaborating with a social worker. She was trying to help him with some of his life difficulties managing his life. And we got a call one day that he had ended up in the psych ward in the lockdown unit, and that he
Mm.
was throwing furniture and threatening staff. And it just hit me in a flash, Justine. I just had
Yeah.
a vision, and I said to my colleague, I wish we had a sheep ranch out east where we could send these guys when they got home, where they
Yeah.
could work on the land, sleep under the stars, and be in a community of other veterans. Because
Mm.
what I realized was that he was being re-traumatized in that setting because he was out of control and he had people trying to control him. Now,
Yeah.
granted, their motivation was to keep him safe, but the atmosphere, I could only imagine his experience. There was a disconnect happening. They weren't able to respond to him, it seems, and meet him where he was at. And I thought,
Yeah.
what would be different if he had gone to a beautiful outdoor peaceful setting with
Yeah.
peers who understood him,
Mm.
uh, and then having the opportunity to work on the land and be outside and be around animals and really have a therapeutic healing experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the vision. That's how that initial vision came to me, and that was a few years. Well, that was right before I transferred from the Portland VA to the satellite clinic in Bend.
Mhm. Did he get to, work on that ranch?
That's a great question, and no, he so I actually had to say goodbye to him. When you're in your therapist, it's called terminating with your clients. It's one of the hardest things you can do as a therapist is to tell your clients you're not going to be able to work with them anymore. So I had to tell my
Mm.
clients, my veteran clients in Portland, that I was transferring to the clinic in the VA clinic in Bend. And so
Yeah.
I had to actually go say goodbye to him in the psych ward, which is really difficult. And he said, he gave me a huge compliment. He said, "You're the best shrink I've ever had." And so I told him because of my code of ethics that
Mhm.
I couldn't contact him. I wouldn't be able to check in on him. I wouldn't be able to ask him how he was doing, like you might normally do with a friend or
Yeah.
someone. But because of my clinical profession, I couldn't contact him. But I said,
Mhm.
"But you can contact me anytime
Okay.
to check in
Yeah.
if you want." And I said, "All you have to do is call the VA 1-800 number and tell the operator you want to talk to Alison Perry." That was
Mhm.
before I was. And so, I transferred to the Ben Clinic and I worked there 2.5, 3 years before I left to start the Veterans Ranch. So,
Mhm.
however, a year after I transferred to the clinic from the medical center in Portland, I did get a call from him
Oh,
a year
okay.
later. And it was awesome. He said, "Miss Perry, you said I could call you anytime and let you know how he was doing. And I just want to let you know I'm doing really well. And I have my own apartment now and I have a job." And so
Oh,
it's
nice.
very heartwarming. So I know that he got the help he needed and reached a place of stability, and it was great to hear from him. But I did go on after I left the VA, and once the ranch was operational, we started operations in April of 2015. I did have veterans who had been clients in
Mhm.
Central Oregon, whether they had been part of PTSD groups or individual clients, come out. Many of them did come out and get involved in the Veterans Ranch.
Nice, nice. I mean, it's amazing. Like, I was looking at the pictures of the ranch on Instagram. I was able to find the Instagram page for the ranch, and you just see that I don't know. It just looks so peaceful, and it's exactly what I think everybody envisions when they feel, kind of down and, like they want to have that connection with nature. That's what it always goes back to, I think, is that when people are feeling down or like unfulfilled, I feel like a lot of times it really does go back to nature. Like people sometimes say, "I just wish I could go, live in the forest
Mhm.
and work the land." I've had that thought so many times. I'm like, "Oh my God, I wish I had a farm." Like, I wish I
Mhm.
had animals.
Mhm.
It's just this connection that, we obviously naturally do have with nature, but that is kind of taken out of us just over the course of, civilization, changing and getting more, I guess, mechanized and urbanized and everything like that.
Yeah.
Um, so when you see these images, it makes you wonder, what kind of, I guess, progression have you seen over the course of the lives of the patients who came to work at the ranch?
Well, let me tell you a little bit more about, what sort of happened. So,
Sure.
um, I'm still in consultation with the ranch, but I'm not employed there anymore. So I'm not currently
Yeah.
managing it. You kind of, another big event in my life was that I got married and moved to
Yeah.
Colorado in the last couple of years. So,
Mhm.
um, but the ranch, as I mentioned before, is 19 acres. So
Mhm.
it has, animals, sheep, llamas, chickens. So there are opportunities for veterans to get involved in taking care of animals, volunteering and caring for them, spending time with them. There's also a hydroponics greenhouse. They have a phenomenal greenhouse manager who's been there since 2017. He's a horticulturist by trade, and is fantastic working with vets and grows amazing vegetables and lettuce in the hydroponics greenhouse. And so that's
Awesome.
actually a skill and something that veterans can learn there as well. So there is a vocational or educational aspect. It's sort of therapeutic, vocational, and then when I was there, we had structured and unstructured peer support groups. So we had a contract with Oregon Health Authority to support a full-time peer support specialist, full-time veteran peer support specialist. So we had veteran peer support specialists facilitating groups. We also had a weekly work day for vets where they would come out and do volunteer projects, and then we had the community providing meals, so that veterans come out and work, visit, talk, share a meal together. And often what you saw, Justine, and I'll give you a story first. I'll tell you some other stories of veterans whose lives were changed and many lives saved. But there's a story that it was something that started it was in our first year of operation. And we had a veteran coming out who had been a medic in Vietnam, and then later on became a physician assistant and actually went to Afghanistan as a physician assistant. So that's rare to have veterans that span that length, that in between those two wars. And so he had served in both Vietnam and Afghanistan, and he was coming out to the ranch. So the vets would often come out and they were helping with irrigation. They're working out in the pasture. They're doing whatever. It's really healthy to get out and do that physical work. Another aspect of that is getting out of your head, right? And getting active and experiencing all the sensory benefits of being really in nature, from the soil, etc. So we used to call this guy Doc, this veteran. We called him Doc. And so Doc was out working in the pasture on some irrigation pipe with a younger veteran of Afghanistan. And I think this was shortly after we had gotten started. And Doc noticed that the younger vet had a tattoo on his arm. He had a KIA, which means killed in action, and he had a date. And it happened to be that same date. And so Doc knew that this younger vet had lost a soldier, had lost a friend in Afghanistan. But he didn't say anything to him about it. He didn't ask him about it. And he said they were working side by side for about 4 hours. And after 4 hours, the younger Afghanistan vet started talking about that day and what had happened that day. And so the beauty of that atmosphere, of that environment, is that I called it an organic approach to healing. You're facilitating the conditions for people to process their trauma, if they want to process it in that way, by talking about it. But they're around others who can understand and who can hold whatever that experience is and who can relate to it. So that was often so much of the therapeutic healing aspect of the environment. It's also what so many veterans struggle with when they get out of the military, whether they've been in combat or not, is a sense of isolation and a sense of disconnect from, number one, from their own identity and who they are, and trying to figure out who they are now outside of the context of the military, not having that mission anymore, but also not having peers, not having support. And so they're sort of cut loose and floating around out there. And then if they do have military related or combat trauma, it makes it much harder to kind of get your feet on the ground again and find your place. And so the ranch was really a vehicle for that. And we had so many veterans say, I wish I'd had a place like this to go to when I got out of the military. And so many of them are finding the support that they need to have the strength to get back engaged in the broader community and get back engaged in life. And the ranch was what I called a protected environment. So we didn't have civilians out during the week. We had civilians involved in specific ways because they wanted to help vets, they wanted to contribute. So we would have them, provide meals, or if there were things we needed at the ranch to function and do operations, they would be able to contribute. But it was really more like, I would call it a big therapy room for veterans. It's just taking place outside, because you wouldn't have your wife come to your PTSD therapy group, with a bunch of soldiers, and you certainly wouldn't have your 5-year-old child show up. And many of our veterans had, and this is some of the deepest trauma and moral injury, if you've heard that term, is children in a combat zone. And so to have kids running around on a farm with people who've been in combat with traumatic experiences related to children doesn't work. So we did have a designated day on Saturdays, which was Family Day, where veterans could invite their family members and children to come out and experience the ranch and meet the animals and garden. We also had, community gardens for them to
Mhm.
grow their own food and that. So I'll pause there. I can tell you a lot of stories, but I want to make sure I answered your question.
Yeah. No, I mean it's amazing. Like any stories that you could tell, I'm sure they're going to be just, very very moving and inspirational, just like, what you were just saying. But I do have a question, just to clarify. So, are the veterans are they living here, or is it just, they come here for as if it's like their job?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. They do not live at the ranch. So
Okay.
so many of the veterans who come out to the ranch are on anywhere from 70 to 100% disability. So that was another motivation for me when the vision for the ranch did start with that young man I mentioned who ended up in the psych ward, but it also evolved based on what I kept hearing consistently from veterans in my counseling office,
Mm,
which was number one, that the most peaceful they ever felt was out in nature or around animals.
yeah.
Um, and when I would try to encourage them to volunteer and get out and get out of their isolation and go do something that would make them feel better, they would say, "Well, the only thing I would want to do is I'd only want to volunteer with other veterans." And so that was another
Mm,
reason the ranch was sort of put together, that it was a place where they could go find purpose, find meaning, find community, find support, and have something to do to get them out of their house. Because when you're 28 years old and you're on 100% disability, and some of them were on what they call total and permanent unemployability, which means they will never work again.
yeah.
It's kind of a recipe for disaster if you have combat trauma or if you have a diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder. You have no purpose, you have no meaning, and you have no support system. That's when we get into the dark realms of not wanting to live anymore. And
Yeah.
so having a place to go, having a purpose, um, the veterans that came to us had housing. Many of them were in relationships. Some of them had jobs. Some of them will come out on weekends. Some of them come out, when they're not working,
Yeah.
just to be a part of the community and to contribute and to meet other veterans, and
Mm,
to be a part of something again, like they were when they were in the military.
yeah.
There was a future vision of a third, I called it a third leg of the vision, which has not yet happened, and it may never happen, but it was to provide specialized end of life care to combat veterans in that setting.
Mm,
So it was the agriculture, the peer support, and the specialized end of life care. And so we did have a home on the property we raised the money, we had it remodeled and licensed with the state of Oregon in 2017 as an adult foster home.
mhm.
So we would have had the capacity to have 5 veteran residents. And so I also described the ranch sometimes as a monastery for veterans.
Yeah.
So, it didn't have any specific religious
Yeah.
affiliation,
Yeah.
of course, but many of the veterans who came there felt that it was, one veteran described it as hallowed ground.
Mm,
Was very much a sacred space. And so
yeah.
it
Yeah.
was, if you think of an analogy, Justine, think of a senior center, right? So seniors they're sort of a marginalized population. They're often isolated, even if they're in a nursing home, or maybe
Yeah.
they're living alone, but they go to the senior center to meet others, and they go to the senior center to recreate, and they go to
Mhm.
find some, to be healthy, to move, to be active, to keep their brain sharp,
Yeah.
so the ranch is similar to that in that sense, without the residence part, without that third program. It's
Mhm.
very much about that community building, or you could say like going to a church, right? People are getting
Yeah.
involved in something that gives their life meaning, that helps them connect to community, um, and provides that level of support.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm wondering about these folks who do come to the ranch, the veterans. Have any of them kind of gone on left, and gone on to live, probably not normal lives, I guess, after experiences like that. But could you potentially talk about a little bit of, I guess details about some people who found, I guess, that sense of purpose from the ranch and went on to do other things?
Yes, absolutely. A couple of them are in the documentary, so I'll mention a couple of their stories. Um, most notably, I think, and most dramatic, and I can mention his name since he's in the documentary, is as a veteran and a very good friend of mine now, named Robert Shaw, who is currently living in Wichita, Kansas. And Robert came to us. Oh, it was couple years before I moved to Colorado,
Yeah.
which was about a year and a half ago. I moved here, and Robert had grown up on farms and ranches in Northern California. He served in the Army as a mechanic.
Mhm.
He got very physically injured while serving in the Army.
Yeah.
He had grown up working on vehicles and maintenance on farms and ranches, and he was told
Oh,
to do something he knew he shouldn't do. I mean, he knew that he would get hurt if he did it, but his command, whoever was next of chain of command, told him to do it anyway, and that's how he got injured. So there
yeah.
already is another psychological injury. And then after that, he was being medically retired, and then he was sexually assaulted in his barracks. And his fellow soldiers kind of turned on him because he was, no longer useful, so to
Wow.
speak. So sort of trauma after trauma, and Robert had a history of addiction when he came to us, struggling with alcohol abuse and addiction, and also suicide attempts. And he had had a number of suicide attempts. And took him a while I think he was working with someone at the county in mental health who was trying to get him out to the Veterans Ranch. It took him a while to get out there, as
Yeah.
it does a lot of vets, because they're skeptical, right? And
Yeah.
their trust has been broken deeply. So it takes a while to be open to something like that. And many vets would say this the first time he came out. He said, the first time he came out, I fell in love. And so he started coming out 3 days a week.
Wow.
And he ended up becoming our volunteer ranch manager. And then at one point,
Mm.
he was our paid ranch manager. And
Wow.
Robert really not only had the skills and the talents to help us and he still contracts with the ranch and goes back and helps them with the agriculture aspect, but he was
Mhm.
helping us rehabilitate our pastures, which some of them were not healthy when we bought the property. But he was also teaching and training other veterans. And so
Mm.
he found his own purpose, not only through contributing to the
Yeah.
ranch environment, but by teaching and training. And then he wanted to get into public speaking, and he wanted to help raise money. And so then he was coming out to events with us and speaking. And so here he is in this completely transformed life. Things are better at home. Things are better. His wife, his mood is better. He's maintaining sobriety, and
Mhm.
he's excited about the future. And
Yeah.
I'll never forget, there was one evening out, and it was beautiful in the evenings at the ranch. I never told you the ranch was set back on sort of a rectangular property. The house was set back, and
Mhm.
you looked out over a pasture with sheep grazing, and you looked out over, it's called the Three Sisters Mountains in Central.
Oh,
So you looked
I think
over.
I've heard of that, yeah.
It's quite stunning. And so the sunsets,
Mm.
were just
Yeah.
gorgeous. We were in this sort of twilight evening time, and I was finishing a tour with some donors. And Robert had come in from the pasture, and he was covered in dust. His plaid Western shirt and his Wranglers. And I was going to give him a hug. He's like, "No, I'm too dusty. I'm too messy," And he had his cowboy hat on, and he just had this huge grin on his face. He just had
Yeah.
this smile. And I said, "How's it going?" And he said, "Oh, it's going awesome." He said, "Those pastures are greening up out there."
Oh,
And I said, "That's awesome." And he said, I'm starting to have that feeling again, like I had when I was a kid." And I
mm.
said, "Tell me more." And he said, "Well, just that sense of wonder, and that sense of
Yeah.
excitement." And it really was just so gratifying and so beautiful, because I had written about that before as a trauma therapist. I had written poems about our lost innocence.
Yeah.
I really believe that part of what happens when we re-engage with nature and with animals is we're able to recover some of those lost parts of ourselves.
Mm.
Um, when you've experienced trauma, particularly the destruction of war or the violence of human on human assault,
Yeah.
it's destructive, right? It's sort of a spirit of destruction. And
Yeah.
then you can kind of internalize what happens to a lot of people as you start becoming self-destructive.
Mm.
And so when veterans are in this environment, they're able to be generative. They're
Yeah.
able to create, they're
Yeah.
able to nurture, they're able to reclaim some of that, like Robert, that sense of wonder.
Mm.
So now he is in Wichita, Kansas with his family where he can afford to buy some land, and he wants to start his own veterans ranch,
Awesome.
the same model. And he is working on an ag business degree right now.
Wow. Oh my goodness. That is amazing. I mean, I was actually just gonna ask, like, I'm sure that anybody who, has learned about your ranch and this, this project and stuff, um, it comes to your mind, like, I wanna do something like that, you know? So could we talk a little bit about, I guess, how you came to be able to do this, like, grants and all that kind of stuff? Like, what was the process? And was there any point at which you felt like it might not actually, come to fruition?
Many points,
Yeah,
many points.
yeah,
It is quite a tremendous undertaking to start something without really having a plan.
yeah,
You and I were emailing about purpose and passion, and some of the questions, about passion. And passion passion will get you very far. Passion will drive you to have the energy and the motivation to complete something.
mhm,
But you have to also have the skills, the knowledge, and the abilities, right? So
yeah,
you have to have some natural born skills and be open to learning and developing, um, as a leader, as a manager, as a business owner, essentially, to really do something like this.
yeah,
So, and a lot of people will start, Justine, with after they've retired and they have a very big network and they have contacts that have money. Maybe they were in the military, they worked in Washington, D.C. So they can kind of transition into, like, hey, all my good friends who have a lot of money or, government contacts, I'm starting a nonprofit and I'd love you to help me get it started. And so they have
yeah,
that. So I didn't have that. I left the VA as a counselor.
mhm,
Um, I took a career step because I knew I couldn't just jump out of the VA as a counselor and go start a ranch.
yeah,
That was not going to happen. So my last 6 months with the VA, I was trained as a contracting officer representative. So I learned how, that was in a housing program, and that was the first time the VA had contracted with outside entities to provide a service. So I learned about that, which was very valuable later on, right? Contracting, government contracts. And then I took a couple different jobs, but one of those was as the executive director of another veterans nonprofit in town. You
mhm,
know, that allowed me to get an identity in the community and to talk to
mhm,
people about my dream and my vision. And I'm
yeah,
coaching someone right now. I'm coaching a young woman, in Oregon, who has a very similar vision, and she wants to help young women who, teen girls
yeah,
who are just being released from the criminal justice system, and to provide a very similar model but hers would be residential, where these teen girls can go and learn life skills and be in a safe environment. And
mhm,
and so, we're talking about, how to get something like that started.
yeah,
Um, so I took these different career steps, and as the executive director, and what I told my coaching client was, you need to talk about your vision to everyone you meet. Tell
mm,
everyone what you want to do. And there's two
yeah,
parts to that. One of it is just magnifying the energy and the vision and the intention, and continuing to sort of nurture that spiritually and
yeah,
energetically. You just keep reinforcing. I think we all know what we focus on, we create, in
mhm,
both negative and positive. And so
yeah,
if you have that seed of that vision and a passion for something, you really want to nurture that little seed and keep it growing.
yeah,
And then the other part is just networking and starting to let people know, because you'll meet people who will say, "Oh my gosh, it's amazing what you want to do. I'd love to help you. How can I help you?" So then
yeah,
you're meeting people that have different skills and talents. So having been the executive director at another nonprofit, which I actually ended up being a whistleblower there,
mm,
um, I like to say God kind of chewed me up and spit me out, because I learned everything not to do in a nonprofit. Yeah. So, I'm taking these career steps to kind of
yeah,
learn, what do I need to know to do this? And
mhm,
really, the bottom line, for starting out in a for-profit or a nonprofit, is having capital, is having investment, is having money. So you've got to learn how to raise money,
yeah,
because you can have the best vision in the world, but if you don't know how to raise money, and you don't know how to build a network, and you don't know how to um, market yourself and convince people and tell your story and get them excited and passionate about what you want to do, that's really how this built for
Mhm.
me.
Yeah.
Because after I left the nonprofit where I was the whistleblower, I had a network of people who wanted to help, and so I started an advisory board.
Mhm.
And that advisory board, and that was comprised of retired military veterans, young veterans who would have been clients, people in the community who worked with other nonprofits or had valuable backgrounds to
Mhm.
contribute to the mission. And then some of those people ended up becoming our board of directors and our first sort of volunteer staff to get it going.
It's definitely something. I mean, so going back, you mentioned, just briefly that, we kind of give energy to positive things like, if you're trying to start something like your business or something like that, but also to negative things. So that kind of brings to mind, if somebody were to be trying to start something like this or just anything, because I feel like this advice that you've just given could definitely apply to anything that you might be trying to start,
Mhm.
for sure, like networking and all that stuff. So I'm wondering, if do you think that your background in counseling and therapy and stuff like that, kind of got you through it in a way? Because I think that a lot of times when people try to start something, I mean, I can speak from my own experience starting, me trying to start this. I'm like, I have those voices in my head that are like, what are you doing? This is dumb, all that kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
so it's hard to
Mhm.
to ignore your own brain in a way, because I know that your brain is trying to help you and protect you, but also it could stop you from doing something that you really want to do. So I'm imagining that maybe with your background, maybe that helped a little. Do you think?
That's a really interesting question. I think my counseling background really helped me specifically with building relationships with others.
Okay.
That was a huge aspect of it. And then I think having the awareness. I'm really thinking about your question.
Yeah.
I think it comes back in many ways for me to that passion, having that passion. And because you have your own internal voices, but then you also have people outside. Oh, that's
Yeah.
going to be really hard. Oh, that's going to take you a long time. And
Mm.
a few years into this, and it was very, very hard. I haven't really spoken about that, but I mean, and there were times when I thought this is going to fail. How are we going to
Yeah.
do this? I have no idea how we're going to get from point A to point B. How could we have gotten this far and this would happen? There
Yeah.
were many, many moments like that that really tested me. And I call the ranch a co-creation because spiritually, I believe it was a co-creation with God because it
Mhm.
required a lot of what I would call supernatural help and faith in things. Faith is, faith in things that we can't see, right?
Mhm.
But having that faith, oftentimes you see things happen because you have that faith. You see it manifest in the physical world. So you have your own internal voices, and then you have people telling you can't do it. But there's really something about knowing when you get enough positive affirmation from people, you have to focus on that positive too, right? You have to focus on that, um, because the world is oftentimes going to be against you, right? I
Mhm.
mean, it just um, um, you have to kind of tune that out. And
Yeah.
so I don't know if being a counselor specifically helped me with that, but I was very aware of that. I was
Yeah.
very aware of that.
Mhm. But you did mention that there were times where you felt like it wasn't gonna work, and we couldn't get into that if you want to, but I'm wondering if there was any specific time where you, I guess, almost quit and you were just like, "I can't do this anymore, I'll leave it to somebody else," or something like that?
Yeah, well, actually, there were, 2 times where we hired other individuals to manage the ranch,
Mhm.
and they were both, uh, I would say mid-career men in mid-career,
Yeah.
who had really great resumes.
Mhm.
Um, and one actually almost destroyed the ranch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we wanted to turn it into something completely different, and he had a very um, abrasive style of doing business, and,
Mm.
just a very, very different approach. Probably would have
Yeah.
been great on Wall Street,
Yeah.
um, and had come back from, had come from the East Coast. So a lot of cultural differences in terms of, this veterans ranch in Central Oregon in a rural area, versus like a city back east.
Yeah.
So that didn't work, and so then I was back in the saddle, and that was recovery mode. That was recovering the reputation of the organization in the community. It was recovering from financial damage, and
Mm.
there were a number of times when I thought I can't do this anymore. It
Yeah.
took a toll on my health. It took a toll
Mm.
on my financial life,
Mhm.
um, and it's interesting, Justine, because I was told by board members, or I was told by a few people, well, you can't talk about you can't talk about your personal situation.
Oh,
You you
interesting.
you can't talk about your financial situation.
Mm.
And I have mixed feelings about that now looking back, because and this is something I think may be shifting in the work world in general, and then in the
Yeah.
professional world, is that we realize that these things aren't compartmentalized, and you don't
Yeah.
just like go to work and then turn everything off and go home, and that these things are all combined, right? They're
Mhm.
all connected. And the reality was I devoted 10 years of my life to this, and I made tremendous sacrifices, and I didn't want to get an award for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wanted people to recognize the toll that it takes on a person's life when they do this. And then how do you work with your board members, or consultants, or people helping your organization to say, what's fair for the person doing most of the work and raising most of the money? What's fair for this person's, you know, and what's fair at a business level as well, because many nonprofit founders and executive directors and nonprofit employees are grossly underpaid.
Yeah.
And and so there were times when I thought my personal life is suffering too much for me to be able to keep doing this. But then something would happen, and then there's also the stories that you hear, the testimonials that you hear, the lives that you see being changed. I would
Mm.
maybe be kind of down and out or struggling, but then I would go and I would hear the feedback from veterans and saying, this place saved my life. I can't tell
Yeah.
you how many times I heard that. And so that keeps you going. But
Mhm.
it was certainly, well, and I'm writing a book. I'm writing a book about my journey. So I'm
Yeah.
writing a book about, sort of starting graduate school a month after 9/11, how that impacted my life based on, my brother then, his
Yeah.
career in the military, deploying to Iraq 3 times, and then working as a trauma therapist in the VA. But the journey of starting the nonprofit, because there are many really funny stories. There are many really difficult stories,
Yeah.
many wonderful, victorious stories. There was another time, there was an individual who I knew from my professionally through my work at the VA. I used to see this person at state summits, where it would be the Oregon Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA, the Oregon National Guard. And so this was someone who had served in the National Guard, in a pretty important role, and got very involved in the ranch, and it seemed like a really wonderful thing for a while, and then we had a series of snowstorms that
Mm.
created a lot of challenge for us with animals, and
Yeah.
we had some situations that were very, very difficult, and so then you're running a business, you're running an organization. For many of that, I was the only paid employee, and for several years that was part-time.
Mhm.
And you're working with volunteers, and a lot of these
Yeah.
volunteers not only have post-traumatic stress disorder, but some of them have more serious mental issues which don't really surface up front. So those are some of the unique dynamics of
Yeah.
doing something like this. And I think what's relevant for anybody who's wanting to pursue a path is finding that balance of what you can sacrifice and what you're willing to sacrifice. What is it worth to you to pursue the vision?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
because it's not always so black and white.
Mhm. Yeah, I was gonna say, I think a lot of people hope that if they do follow, something that they're passionate about, everything will sort of fall into place, and they'll just be living like this happy, wonderful, life and everything like that. But of course, it does take a lot of sacrifice beyond just financial sacrifice, which I think a lot of people anticipate that it's going to probably be a financial sacrifice. But and time as well.
Time.
But also the I guess the mental toll that it takes and the physical toll that it takes on you as well. So I'm wondering, of course, you're no longer, you mentioned you're no longer controlling that the ranch. So what you mentioned that it was because you got married, but I'm wondering, what about getting married and what about that whole situation told you, okay, I'm ready to walk away. This is the right time. How do you know? How do you know when to walk away? Because it's like your baby in a way.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's a difficult one to answer because in my situation, it really came down to some differences of opinion between me and my board of directors of
Mhm.
how to go forward. I think we all shared the vision of this model of care being something that should happen at the national level, and I think we had different views about how to get there.
Mm.
I think the event of meeting my husband
Mhm.
accelerated, accelerated a new situation for everyone.
Yeah.
Um, and uh, it is still my hope and my wish to see this model of care implemented at the
Yeah.
national level. I just recently did a presentation at Loyola University in Chicago at their grand rounds for psychiatry residents, and there was tremendous interest. And there was interest in potentially doing research and um, about how and why this model works and how it promotes post-traumatic growth because we still have such a crisis with suicide, right,
Mhm.
among veterans and other populations. And so this is a model that's applicable not just to the veteran population, but there was another nonprofit in Oregon that created something similar for at-risk youth. And
Mhm.
so I think it came down to a difference in how to do business,
Yeah.
um, and making the documentary was a very big event for everyone in the organization, and it was a disruptive event,
Oh,
you know,
okay.
but a disruptive event that the documentary has won awards in Europe. It has won awards at psychology film festivals in the United States. It was recently picked up by Amazon UK, and it's very difficult to get American media picked up by European sources. And so
Yeah.
there is but sometimes when something big like that happens in an organization, it is disruptive and it
Yeah.
does create a tumult. And so I think what's happening right now is that everyone's finding a new equilibrium. The
Mhm.
branch itself, the board of directors, the operation, the management of it, and myself in my own life. And so those may dovetail again in the future,
Yeah.
But for my part, I continue to promote helping other veterans and other individuals who want to implement a similar healing model because the impact is so profound on people's lives.
Mhm. Mhm.
And I hope that answered your question.
No, yes, it did, it did. It also leads into kind of, if you wouldn't mind speaking a little bit about, what you did transition into and what you're doing now.
Mhm. I will, and I do want to make a note before I do that to say, to just highlight that work-life balance, right? Because
Yeah.
I honestly think I probably would have married before if I hadn't. I mean, this is my first marriage, and a lot of that has to do with sort of my own childhood trauma, and
Mhm.
but it also has to do with the fact that I dedicated 10 years of my life
Yeah.
to a vocation, to founding an organization. That was my child, that was my spouse, that was my
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
And I was in some serious relationships during the course of that, but that was my mission,
Yeah.
and took precedence over everything. But I also got to a point where the lack of support and the financial struggle was getting to be too much.
Mhm.
So getting married, was incredible for many reasons, but it was a life shift to get some more
Yeah.
balance, to get some more support, to be able to continue doing amazing work, hopefully. And so as I mentioned before, I'm working as a trauma informed coach and consultant. So I'm like executive coaching, so helping coach people who want to start nonprofits or who are growing nonprofits,
Okay, yeah.
consulting with businesses or organizations that are trying to become more trauma informed or uh, have a more informed clinical approach to working with veterans,
Mhm.
but also education, clinical education seminars. I'm doing some public speaking, which I enjoy very much. And um, I'd love to support other nonprofits that are doing similar work to help them raise money.
Mhm.
That's something I enjoy doing, and I really like teaching, and so that's something I'm doing a little bit more of now as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mentioned the big thing is writing the book, right? I'm like, oh,
Yes.
by the way, so I'm actively working on finding a publisher right now. So I'm working with a literary agent and in Florida, and working in that direction, and trying to have the discipline to write, which is, all the stories and all the content is there, but getting it out on paper and making it meaningful and impactful for people, because I hope that it also inspires people in exactly, the subject that you're talking about in your podcast. I want
Yeah,
people to be able to say, oh, I have a vision, or I'm a veteran who wants to do something like this. How do you do this? How did this happen? So it's
yeah.
meant to be sort of an inspirational story, but also sort of a how to.
Mhm. I think that's really important. That kind of leads into my next question. So it's definitely a very, I guess, divided question too. About if somebody should actually try to pursue something that they're passionate about, or if they should just leave that as like a side thing or a hobby. So
Mhm.
I'm wondering, I would imagine that you would be a proponent of, really going all into it, since that's kind of what you've done. But I'm wondering what your, I guess, overall idea and any advice that you might have for people who are thinking about doing this. Like, should everybody try to pursue, their passions, or is it, maybe certain people are cut out for it, and other people just aren't?
Mhm. Mhm. It's a good question, and it's also a difficult one to answer
Mhm.
because reminds me of my ethics professor in graduate school. Every answer was, it depends.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
What do you do in this situation? It depends.
Mhm.
But I think, to start, there are some cases where if your passion about something is so strong, sometimes, like for me, I knew in my soul, I knew I
Yeah.
needed to do this.
Mhm.
And then to have people say, none of the naysayers, but the people who actually, I had so many people, when I would tell them the vision, they say, I'm getting chills, or they would start crying, or they would
Yeah.
say, this needs to happen. Um, so I had some affirmation early on that this isn't just me. This isn't just some wild idea. There's something deeper to this. There's something really,
Yeah.
I believe, archetypal about this method of healing and helping people.
Mhm.
But I knew for me, it was a huge risk. But one of the things I thought about when I decided to leave my secure federal job, and rather than become what they call a lifer with a lifelong career in federal service,
Yeah.
I decided to take that leap of faith and jump. And I thought, well, if my veterans can survive war, then I can survive trying to start a nonprofit in the United States of America. you know, that's
Yeah.
that's kind of how I looked at it. I don't know if that was the best. I mean, it worked out. But I think you have to do a lot of soul searching and
Mhm.
say, again, what does this mean to me? And what am
Mhm.
I willing to sacrifice? And there's also, I don't know if you're familiar with Carl Jung or Joseph Campbell, but the archetype of the hero's journey.
Mm.
In the hero's journey, we could say, Star Wars or The Hobbit, right?
Yeah.
The Hobbit's living in his safe little hobbit hole where everything's known and comfortable and cozy, but then he has an opportunity to go on an adventure into the complete unknown, and into the
Yeah.
gives me chills, and
Yeah.
into the great wide world where there
Mhm.
are monsters and there are villains and there
Yeah.
are challenges, but there are also wise guides, and there are
Mhm.
friends, people that come alongside you on the journey. And so I think, thinking about it in that context, the hero returns after the journey and the
Yeah.
struggle and the challenge, hopefully victorious, right? Comes back with knowledge, with wisdom, with experience that they
Mhm.
would not have gained had they not decided to take the risk and take the journey. So
Yeah.
I personally am an enthusiast for people doing that.
Mhm.
I will also say there is a realistic component um, to this, and that is, maybe not everyone's going to be a world famous guitar player if playing guitar is their passion. And so some people have to have a day job. Some people
Yeah.
have to find a way to make a living. And in my case, had I not gotten married, it might not have been sustainable for me to continue as a single woman would have making what I was making as an executive director. That might not have been sustainable for me, which wouldn't have been my preference, but it might have been the reality. And so, it does depend on a lot of factors, but I would certainly say when you're younger, that's the time really, especially to take those huge risks.
Mhm.
Maybe some people will think I'm an ageist, but I think sometimes when you're younger too, you don't know what you don't know.
Mhm.
And when you're older, it's like, oh, well, I know what would happen if I do this.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's about using some wisdom, some discernment, some real soul searching. And then I'm a big fan of talking to other people and asking for help in consulting.
Mm.
Anytime I didn't know something, I was unsure of something, I would always try to find somebody who knew more than me or had more experience than me. And there's a caveat there, which is that sometimes people who have sometimes you have to still follow your soul,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Sometimes you
Yeah.
and you'll know that because things will be aligned for you.
Mhm.
Even though people might you would see their so you have to discern. You have to
Yeah.
discern.
I feel like you're getting at maybe experience, like, and wisdom that comes from, maybe not necessarily like a bad place, but more of like a, "Oh, I know how difficult this is," or,
Mhm.
I know that, a lot of people probably don't succeed at what they're trying to do, and it comes from like a place of trying to be protective of your loved ones or whatever, but it can really be detrimental, I think, to somebody who comes to you with, this dream or this interest, so it makes me think of back when I was in college, and it's a whole nother story, but so when I was in college, I went to college for a couple things, and one of them was theater because I really wanted to do voice acting. Again, it's a separate story, but so I'll never forget, like, a lot of the teachers, and they were the teachers of this program. They were the theater teachers. They told us, they're like, just so you guys know, probably almost none of you will end up with a job.
Mhm.
And, if any of you actually do get, on stage or like in movies or shows, whatever, it's you're probably still gonna basically have no money, and you're not gonna have any success. They basically told us you're not gonna have any success. And you can kind of see that there's probably half of the people who are like, no, I'm gonna prove them wrong. Like, you're wrong, whatever, I'm gonna prove you wrong. And then the other half, it kind of gets in your head, and you're like, oh, okay, well, should I even try this? And I think that was probably a bit of a tactic in a way of their own. But that's again a
Not
separate
like
story.
weeding people out to see how committed they are, how
Yeah.
really do they have the drive to be in the business.
Yeah, yeah. But it does kind of it brings that to mind, about how you really do have to have that tenacity, it seems. And again, you mentioned that for you, the tenacity comes from, just this drive of your purpose. But I'm wondering if you have any advice, I guess, on how to foster something like that, because for me, like I mentioned, there's kind of two different groups of people. I think there's the people who want to prove people wrong, and then the people who I might fall on this other side, who kind of feel like, I guess maybe they know, and I don't know, and I let those voices kind of in my head sometimes overpower me, and
Mhm.
it feels, I don't know, it feels like, why even try sometimes, and I try to I always try to like fight that, but it's hard. I don't really have that natural I'm gonna prove them wrong type thing with this kind of thing. I do have it with other things, but not this. So
Yeah.
I'm wondering, how do you like foster that? How do you foster that feeling
So
of, yeah, yeah.
yeah, I've been listening to your question and hearing you talk, and I think a lot about the spiritual aspect of this, and for me personally, and I'm a person of faith.
Mhm.
I believe for me in my situation that I believed that what I was doing was good and that it
Yeah.
was good outside of just me, that
Yeah.
it wasn't about just something I wanted.
Mm.
It was actually a part of my own therapy was finding that purpose. It was
Mhm.
part of my own healing and journey. But for me, I felt like I knew in my soul I wanted to do something good.
Mhm.
And there was something about that spiritually, energetically, like I believe good magnifies good and good creates good. It's generative,
Yeah.
it's life-giving. And so I think sometimes if we're doing something because I want to be the biggest star in Hollywood,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
I want to be the biggest, corporate, mega star, mega CEO or whatever. Sometimes if we're doing things for the wrong reasons, that can
Yeah.
also impede the growth process. I mean, it just depends. So for me, um, I think that was a part of feeling so confident in pursuing it was I know I want to do something to help people. I also knew that if it didn't go exactly as I wanted it to go, it was
Mhm.
still a journey of discovery and it would lead me to other areas.
Yeah.
And one of the questions you and I had discussed some questions ahead of time, or one of them was about how has your professional journey affected your personal growth.
Yes. Yes.
Me, the lessons I've really learned are that I wouldn't say I feel like I can do anything, but I have a tremendous amount of confidence now in my ability to create things and
Mm.
to generate things. And
Yeah.
I have had the experience of doing it and the experience of learning what helped me to do
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Um, I've also learned, I've learned a ton. And so even if something doesn't go exactly like you want it, or you think there's a door closing, or you think this is failing, it's leading you somewhere else. And you
Mhm.
learn from every aspect of that. So I think part of that is also, um, if you don't have that tenacity, like I'm going to prove them wrong, it's like, you don't have to approach it from that sort of combative negative mindset as much as I really want to do this and I really want to help others and I really want to make a difference. And so I'm going to try to figure out how to do that.
Yeah.
And then at a certain point, like you realize, like, am I just banging my head against the wall? Am I not getting the traction I need to be successful?
Yeah.
Because I heard this from someone named Richard Rohr. He says we have to find, and he's a nonprofit. He's a Franciscan priest, and he runs a nonprofit in New Mexico called the Center for Action and Contemplation. And he says we have to find the balance between our sacred dance and our survival dance.
Mm.
So our sacred dance is what brings us to life in the world, gives our life meaning and purpose, and it's our vocation, it's our spiritual calling,
Mhm.
whatever that looks like for us in our life. But our survival dance, we're physical beings living in a physical world. We have to eat, we have to have shelter, and everyone has a different standard of living that they
Yeah.
want to cultivate. Um, and so you have to find the balance between those things. That's just part of the reality of it.
Mhm. Yeah. That kind of goes back to what you were mentioning before about the work-life balance, and that's definitely a very, I guess, popular buzz term nowadays is work-life balance because everybody wants that, and I think everyone's starting to realize that it's not just about wanting it. Like you kind of do need it, otherwise you do start kind of deteriorating, like mentally, physically, all of that stuff. And I feel like with this podcast, that's why I want to talk to people like you because I have this feeling, I don't know, that following something that interests you and or something that you are passionate about, whether it is a job or that's why I mentioned in the beginning, it doesn't necessarily have to be your career. It could be like a hobby or something like that. Because
Mhm,
I have a lot
mhm,
of friends who they're happy in their 9 to 5. They make a good amount of money. They're like, I don't care. This it's not like I'm passionate about this, but it's fine because it provides the means to do other things that I am passionate about. And so
mhm.
you have people like that as well. I tend to fall on the other side. I feel like I have to do something, with my job in a way that, like you said, is helpful to people. And that's kind of what led me down this route. But you know, I guess all that to say, it's definitely it's difficult. I think to I guess to know maybe when like what how not when. Sorry, I lost my train of thought a little bit. I'm gonna have
That's
to cut
okay.
this out.
That's okay.
So I don't know if you have any advice about something like that, because there could be people at crossroads like that, who really don't know what to do. Like, do I continue to follow this thing I'm interested in or passionate about, or do I just kind of go back into the mainstream? But I'm wondering, if it wasn't for your brother's experiences, and you mentioned, of course, 9/11, um, and then even the experience with you leaving the ranch and stuff like that. If it wasn't for all these kind of major shifts that were happening beside yourself, I guess, do you think you still possibly would have gone into something like this, or do you think you kind of mentioned it before, like, how do you think your life would have been different?
I think it's a great question, and I think it comes. We could have a whole other episode on trauma,
Yeah.
and how that impacts a person. And I think what I've seen with my veterans and what I've experienced myself is that, and I think it's why I was so interested in the lives of artists. Kind of coming
Yeah.
back to the roots, coming back to the beginning is. Um, when you're a creator, which is I'm in a women's leadership group, and someone said, well, you're a creator, you're going to go on to create, more and more. And
Mhm.
I thought that, well, that's true, because that's the roots of being an artist, right? Whatever their medium is, they're
Yeah.
they're a creator. And so I think, for me personally, there was a restlessness in me because of my own trauma,
Yeah.
and there was a need. There's an intensity. I think there was a need for something. I had to have meaning and purpose in my life.
Mhm.
I personally couldn't settle for the status quo. And so I think it comes back to those early childhood experiences and life experiences. Maybe if my brother had never deployed, if 9/11 had never happened, I would have been fine being a therapist in private practice for my entire career.
Yeah.
That could have been how that looked, you know.
Yeah.
But I think, like you're saying, those events, those life events. And so this comes back to this idea that is what my whole career really is about. If I have to look at a theme, it's about post-traumatic growth, right? How do we
Yeah.
take those events? How do we take those life experiences and turn them into gold, turn them into something beautiful, turn them into growth instead of destruction, you
Yeah.
know, or stagnation? How do
Mhm.
we turn those experiences into something that become generative for ourselves and for others?
Mhm.
Um, I just knew, Justine, I knew, I saw everyone around me in the VA, and I thought, and part of that was being an unlicensed counselor. Part of it was practical. If I had been offered a permanent position and
Mhm.
I could have advanced in the institution, I probably wouldn't have left. But I
Yeah.
had barriers and challenges within the institution that caused me to say, this isn't worth the price of my soul. Like,
Yeah.
if I stay
Yeah.
here, I'm being that creator artist person. That wasn't going to be the best fit for me. That
Mhm.
wasn't going to be the best fit for me.
Yeah.
So, um, I hope that answered your question.
It does, it does. It's interesting because it reminded me of something else I was gonna mention, is that and this is true for a few other people who I've spoken with as well, but it does seem like for you, all of these things did kind of come together. So you have your interest in art and stuff like that, and of course storytelling, and again, your background, your family background and everything, from, as a child to as an adult. And then, of course, you build on that, and you have your counseling background and all that. And it seems like everything, and your love of nature again,
Mhm,
it seems like everything really did kind of come together. And so it's definitely interesting because, like I mentioned, there's a few other folks who I've spoken to who kind of have the same story. And I think that's very inspiring for people, especially maybe young people,
mhm.
who want it now, you know? Um,
Right, right.
yeah,
You may have to walk a few different paths before you get to that synthesis. But I do think, like
yeah,
you're saying, there's a common theme or a common thread. And for me, that, you know, the how my life was impacted by trauma, and then working with people whose lives were severely impacted by trauma, that was a
yeah,
threat. But then it became about that transformative aspect of it, about the post traumatic growth aspect of it, and being able to take things that might have seemed negative about our lives and turn them into something good. But I like the metaphor of weaving, and taking these different threads
Yeah.
and weaving them into something. That's the creative aspect, right?
Yeah.
That's the yeah.
It's true. I'm wondering, is there anything, this could be a difficult question. I think a lot of times people have a bit of a struggle to figure out an answer to this. So I'm sorry in advance if this is a difficult question, but I'm wondering if there's anything, I guess, looking back at what you've done up to this point, if there's anything that you wish you had known in the beginning of your path down this road, and if there's anything that you would have done differently if you could have.
Yeah, I have thought about this a lot because I do a kind of a lot of leadership work and growth work, and so I'm always trying to improve.
Mm,
And so I did learn this during the course. I learned it painfully
yeah.
and several times, which is to not burn bridges.
Mm,
To not burn bridges with other people, with other professionals. Now, sometimes there are people that are so toxic you need to separate from them. That's
yeah.
just part of life. There are people
Yeah.
that are harmful to you or that
Mhm.
are toxic, and so sometimes you have to separate. But always trying to be diplomatic with others and equanimous and um, figuring out how to extricate yourself from relationships or situations where you're not you're not cutting that person off completely or damaging that relationship so much that it ends when it didn't have to, when
Yeah.
it been beneficial for people in different ways. And so that was something I learned. And if I had learned that much earlier, and that's where I think that's why I like coaching. That's where the coaching comes in, is
Yeah.
helping people earlier on to not make the same mistakes, right? It's
Mhm.
like,
Yeah.
here you're going about your journey. You don't know what you don't know. So,
Mhm.
um, but I think I was in my passionate state. I told one of my early board members, I'm like a wild horse. I have the energy, I have the drive. I just need someone to kind of help me, stay on the track,
Yeah.
and I need a little management,
Mhm.
because of who I was, I have a great capacity to be very intense, which can be a blessing, but it can also be difficult in different areas of life and professionally. And so that learning to manage that intensity and channel it in positive ways,
Mm.
uh, and to grow as a person and realize you have to give and take, you have to compromise, you have to um, learn to handle others with care, even
Mhm.
if you don't disagree, even if you don't like them, because you
Yeah.
certainly don't like everybody,
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I one of my favorite sayings, and I don't know where I heard this, was, "We're told to love our neighbor, but it doesn't mean we have to like them."
It's
You
the That's
Just
hilarious. Yeah.
treat everybody with dignity and
Yeah.
respect,
Yeah.
and handle them with care, and treat them the way you would want to be treated. But it doesn't mean you have to like them or even work with them,
Yeah.
but to find ways. So not burning bridges, because you
Mhm.
never know. Um, Things tend to circle back in my experience, and so I think it's
Mhm.
important to be aware of it, especially when you're running a business and you're doing something public.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's important.
That's really good advice. Because I think, especially nowadays, you always see on social media, a lot of times, I feel like people are almost encouraging people to burn bridges. This is
Mhm,
from what I've seen,
mhm.
and maybe it's skewed. What I'm seeing, it could be skewed. I'm not sure, but I feel like I see a lot of quotes or things like that that are like, not just set boundaries for yourself, because obviously that's necessary, but, basically just completely eliminate everybody from your life who does not, you know,
100%
agree with.
agree with you.
Yeah, like, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
don't listen to them, you're better off without them, but that's not really the case. You're always gonna come across people who you have different, opinions, whose opinions differ from your own, or who just have different backgrounds, different life stories. Everything that makes somebody unique
Right.
and different could be, something that makes you disagree with them. So I think it's definitely, it's useful advice to not necessarily burn those bridges. Like you said, you don't have to, you don't have to like everybody. You don't have to like hang out with them and be friends
Right,
with them,
right.
but you can still engage with them in a positive
Treat
way.
people civilly and respect
Yeah,
their dignity as a person, and you don't have to agree with them, and I think that's a big, that's a whole other episode, right? And that's what
yeah,
a lot of people in leadership are talking right now is,
mm,
we have to live together. We live together in this country, and we may not agree.
yeah,
We may not even like each other, but how do we treat each other with dignity and respect?
yeah,
Because, when we're divided, we fall, and
yeah, yeah,
whether you're in an organization, or in a nation, and
mhm,
it's about figuring out how to respect one another and figure out how to move forward even with disagreement.
yeah. And it kind of leads into another question of, how do you feel that this has, your path has affected you as a person? And it might be the same answer, but I'm wondering if you happen to have any other answers, I guess, about how it's really changed you. And I imagine for the better. But I'm wondering if you have any examples of that.
I think one I mentioned earlier is just the level of confidence, when you've
Yeah,
done
yeah,
something like this and you've seen the success, um, especially when you're not focused on your ego in terms of the success. You see the success spiritually. You see the success by others benefiting from what you've done.
yeah,
Uh, it gives you a lot of confidence to say, if I want to be successful, I and the wisdom to know when doors are closing and when you have a red light and when you have a green light.
mm,
It's given me that level of discernment to not barge into everything, you
mm,
know, without. I mean, I'm a passionate person, and that's part of what made me successful. But to now be a little more skilled and crafted in how I, grow my work, and what I
mhm,
choose to do, what I choose not to do, and knowing what to pursue and what to let go of. Um, I think it's given me a tremendous amount of hope for people's capacity for healing.
mm,
And one of the things I've talked about with friends and with my husband is I said, when you're in nonprofits, you see the best and the worst in people. You see angels, you see people who are such selfless
mhm,
givers. And I think this is one of the benefits of the Veterans Ranch for vets is that they get to see like, wow, people are selflessly giving. They do
yeah,
care.
yeah,
They're not just saying thank you for their service. They're like spending all morning cooking this amazing meal and bringing it here, or they're donating things to help us, so it
mm,
can help restore your faith in humanity. And that's the majority. And then you see, um, that some people are just driven by their own ego and their own
mm,
agenda, and they lose sight of the greater good. They lose sight of the mission, and it becomes about their own need to control and to, direct things. But
mm,
I think it's given me a lot of wisdom,
yeah,
um, and much more confidence. Like I said, that
yeah, yeah,
if I really put my mind to something and learn and take a wise approach to it, I feel like there's a lot I can do, you
mhm.
know?
And that actually kind of leads into the last question I have here, which is, and again, you kind of covered this a little bit, but I'm wondering if there's anything kind of in the future that you have a goal to complete. I know you mentioned, of course, you're writing your book and your current company and stuff like that. But I'm wondering if there's anything else, maybe more just on a personal scale too, because I tend to like to open this up to the people I speak to in a more I don't know, not necessarily career driven way, but just something that you'd like to do, just to like put it out there, and to really try to do it. Like the person I spoke to before, I'll give an example. Um, she's a business owner and stuff, and she mentioned that her goal is basically just to not have a goal. So that counts too. She just wants to relax. And I was
Yeah,
like, that's perfect.
yeah,
That's fine. Like, exactly. So I'm wondering if you have anything like that, maybe on a more personal scale or
yeah.
professional.
Briefly with the professional, I would definitely wanna keep I wanna see more of what has happened at Central Oregon Veterans Ranch. I wanna see that happening in other places around the country. I wanna see that become a more, broadly implemented model.
Mhm.
Personally, and my husband and I were just talking about this. We helped a friend celebrate her 50th birthday down in Lamar, Colorado. So it's about 30 minutes from Kansas. It's beautiful. It's the prairie. It's the plains. I think
Yeah.
I posted a picture on LinkedIn of the
Yeah.
sunrise my friend took.
Yeah.
And so my husband and I were talking on our road trip back. We both would like to own land, and my husband's a veteran, and he's a combat veteran, and
Yeah.
he's an electrical engineer, so he has a lot of skills that I don't have. So we make a good team.
Yeah.
But we would like to have some land, and we would like to grow our own food and maybe have
Mm.
some animals. And so that's a whole other experience is the experience with agriculture, and that's a lot. I learned so many things through this journey, things I
Yeah.
never thought I would want to know about land,
Yeah.
zoning and land use and
Yeah.
permits with the county and, building permits and all of this. But really, the experience of it has also just reinforced how important that connection to nature is
Mm.
and how healing it is on a soul level, on a physical level, on a communal level. And so that's something that we dream about. That's our dream, to keep cultivating together,
Yeah.
is to and we spend a lot of time in nature, whether it's hiking or trail running or, you know, walking out under the fall leaves. So
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's exactly kind of, what I have in mind because I feel like it kind of goes back to, work-life balance type thing, is that, uh yeah, I feel like a lot of times people think about their goals and their life goals, I'll say, in terms of work too. Of course, you have a lot of people have personal life goals, like, I wanna get married, I wanna have children, whatever. But I think that a lot of times when people ask, "What goals do you have?" Um, you know, I don't know, I feel like folks feel the need to say, "Oh, I wanna get promoted in a couple of years, and then I wanna do this other thing and this other thing," and, like, all having to do with your career, but, I think, of course, the personal life is just as important, so it's nice to hear that you have a goal like that. That's
Mhm,
awesome.
mhm.
So that pretty much wraps it up. I'm wondering, do you have anything that you think we didn't cover that you'd like to mention?
I was just as you were talking, I was thinking of a book by a depth psychologist named Bill Plotkin, and I'm
Mm,
not sure if he's still operating his nonprofit, but it's actually was in southwestern Colorado in Durango called Animas Valley Institute. But Bill Plotkin wrote a book called Nature and the Human Soul:
mm,
Cultivating Community in a Fragmented World.
mm,
And his work was very inspirational for me in my journey and with wanting to bring something into reality that was sort of a maybe what he calls a soul image or something that a vision that you have but and it's a wonderful book and it's a fascinating book. And so I want to mention that. But I think the final message would just be to really encourage people, as you're doing with your podcast, to really tap into what their passion is, tap into for me, a lot of this over the years has been through contemplation. I start my day in silence. I start my day making coffee, lighting a candle, and it's prayer, it's contemplation, it's silence. It's not picking up the cell phone the first thing I do when I get out of bed. That's
yeah.
a habit a
Mhm.
lot of people have. But it's
Yeah.
being able to listen,
Mm,
being able to cultivate an interior life and listen, because that's really where you're going to develop discernment and
mm,
and be able to gain the wisdom that you need in that calm, in that peace, and to listen to where you're being led. And so I think cultivating that relationship with yourself, with your soul, that will help guide you in your
mm,
journey is so important. And that also can happen out in nature,
yeah.
away from the built world, away from the man-made world that is giving us all kinds of messages about who we are and what we should be doing. We have to unplug from that, I think,
Mm.
and go inside and spend time in nature and really listen to where we're being led at a deeper level.
Yeah. No, it's true. I mean, you go outside into a park or something like that, and, I feel like this happens probably, I'm sure, to everybody. You get kind of like this inspiration, like, "Hey, I think I wanna do this thing or this thing," and it usually is very, like, driven from a good place, in the heart, in the soul, whatever, and then a lot of folks, yeah, especially I'm from the city, so then you come back into the built world, like you said, and that kind of all goes away, you know. So
Yeah,
it's definitely good
yeah.
advice to get out into nature and stuff,
And
and
it
not,
sorry to
no, no,
interrupt,
no,
but
go
I
ahead.
just thought of something which is also maybe taking a retreat, going on retreat, and that's
Mm,
something I started doing. I had a social work friend at the Portland VA, and she said, "Oh, there's this, Trappist monastery down in it's in actually happens to be in wine country in a beautiful rural part of Oregon, and you don't
yeah,
have to be any religion or anything, but you can go on silent retreat." And so
mm,
having more extended periods of time
yeah,
to have that space
mm,
is also valuable because like you said, when you're in the city, it's like and that happens for a lot of us, right? We just get back into the daily grind of life, but really having periods of time, whether it's in your morning, it's getting away, but creating that space for these things to emerge and really listen to yourself and to your soul.
yeah, yeah. Because I think that once you do kind of come back into the built world, like you said, um, any inspiration that you felt while you were out in nature does kind of go away, and you sometimes I feel like you could sit there and be like, "I can't believe I even thought that. That's silly." You know, whatever your idea might be. So,
Yeah.
I think that's probably very useful to try to spend an extended amount of time, and also just like you said, to really listen to yourself and develop that kind of internal world, which I
Mhm.
think is definitely on the rise. It seems like it's, people are more conscious of that and aware, that they have to kind of do that kind of internal, work
I
and
hope
stuff like
so.
that.
I hope so because
Yeah,
technology is consuming so much of our lives,
true.
so much of our
Yeah.
time, so much of our mental energy, and it's very addictive. It's very
Mhm.
seductive.
Yeah.
But I think it can also kill that organic interior life that wants to be born. Something wants to be born through us.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
It's true, even like this is another conversation, but social media and stuff, how we're like far more connected than we've ever been, and yet we're very disconnected, like far more disconnected than we've ever been because of stuff like social media. And it has its benefits, definitely. But it's like you said, it can be very addictive. And I think, yeah, we all do kind of need to go back and just reunite with nature. And you live in Oregon, right? You said?
I'm in Colorado now.
Oh, you're
I'm
in
in Colorado,
Colorado.
but
Oh, yes,
but
you were in Oregon before.
both beautiful states.
Yeah,
We're closer to Denver than. I swore I would never live in a big city again after being in Central Oregon, but
yeah,
is this is where I've been led. And
yeah,
but like I said, we do get out into the mountains and then
good.
being able to explore other parts of the state, like being
Yeah,
out in southeastern Colorado and
mhm.
getting to experience the plains and the prairies. So accessing that as much as possible is so beneficial.
Yeah, and like I mentioned, I'm from the city, from New York, and
Mhm,
it wasn't until, like, the last few years that, I actually started kind of doing what you mentioned, like, going out into, like, upstate New York and stuff, and
mhm,
seeing, it's just a completely different world. Like, I used to always go upstate to visit my family who lives there, but not really, for a retreat in a way.
mhm,
Um, but it really does help. It's funny because I used to be like, "Oh, no, it's too boring there, like, there's nothing to do." But now I'm like, "Oh my god, no, please, like, I want nothing to do. I just wanna look out, I wanna, like, climb up a mountain, look out at the trees, look out at the water and stuff, because you
yeah,
just don't have that in the cities, and it really does, change the mindset and stuff,
it
and
does.
yeah, very, very useful. And again, that's why, that's I think a huge part about why, the ranch, model,
It's so
is
powerful.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and I do hope that your that part of your dream kind of does come to fruition, because I think that it definitely should be, a model that's used all over the place, because it makes so much sense. It makes so much sense that would be so useful and beneficial. So I definitely, my fingers crossed for that, and I hope everything like that, happens, and maybe in, I don't know, 10 years from now, we'll be having another conversation, and
Mhm,
that's starting
mhm,
to be in the
mhm.
works, hopefully.
When you're a world famous podcaster.
Oh gosh. Well, maybe, I don't know. That would be funny. But yeah, so thank you so much again, Allison. This was a great conversation. Um, And yeah, I thank you so much for joining me.
You're
So
welcome. It was a delight.
yeah, yeah. Have a great rest of your day. Enjoy nature, enjoy everything. And I'll be getting to you soon.
Okay, sounds awesome. Thanks a lot, Justine.
Bye.